Seguimos con la presentación del doctor Idris Yala del Programa de Transformación Económica de Malasia con su conferencia Cómo gestionar una política de desarrollo productivo. El doctor Yala es el director ejecutivo del Performance Management and Delivery Unit, PEMANDU, la unidad encargada de gestionar y asesorar la implementación del Programa de Transformación Económica de Malasia. Graduado de Administración en la Universidad de Sans Malasia con una maestría de la Universidad de Warwick. En 2005 fue nombrado director ejecutivo de Malasia Airlines, trabajó para Shell durante 23 años, donde se desempeñó como director ejecutivo y vicepresidente de Comercio al por menor y de Desarrollo de Nuevos Negocios. Con ustedes, Idris Yala.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. And because this is a graveyard shift, I begin a little bit of introduction about myself. I come from a very small tribe. We are only 5,000 people in the whole world. That guy on the left is my father. And if you look very closely at this photograph, that is my ancestors. Very closely, you'll find they have some skulls there. My ancestors used to go and do head hunting. We chop people's head and get their head and keep it as a trophy. I'm okay, I'm a friendly guy. Next slide, you will see that I was raised in the jungle of Borneo. Right there in the jungle of Borneo, we live in Longhouse. That's an example of a longhouse. I worked in Shell for 23 years. And in 23 years, and then I went to become the CEO of Malaysia Airlines. Then I became a government minister in charge of transformation for 6 years. In the 6 years I've been with the government in charge of transformation, we found out in interaction with many governments, we believe that there are many governments that have lots of beautiful strategies. That's not a problem with the strategies. The problem is how to implement them. That is the problem. Today we discussed many times about the Houseman model and many other models. But whatever models you put there, if you don't implement them, you don't get outcome. So our view is that I want to leave one single message. If you have the strategy at 30,000 feet, that is of no value unless you bring the 30,000 strategy feet down to the ground called the 3-feet program. I want to leave the idea of a 3-feet program for you to think for a moment. We'll get back to that. In our view, if you want to transform an economy, you do need two things to make sure that you achieve big, fast results. The first thing that you need to do is to make sure you have solid leadership, what I call transformational leadership. If you don't have the leadership with you, in the case of Colombia, your president and the whole cabinet, I'm sorry, you will not go very far. It has to begin with the man at the top or the woman at the top saying, I have seen the light. I now want us to walk down the path because I believe that is a happy land. That's where we're going. And the guy must begin by saying, there are three things I think are very important for the leader or the leaders to have. The first attribute of transformational leadership is to make sure that they pursue the game of the impossible, which means you heard from President Santos this morning. He said, put bold targets. So it's no point saying you want to make incremental targets, because if you want to transform, you really have to think big. Arnold Schwarzenegger says, it takes the same amount of effort to do small things than to do the big things. It's the same amount of effort. You might as well go for the big ones. So if you want to transform, you really need to think about three big words. Number one, it must be big. Number two, it must be fast. Number three, it must have result. If there has no result, that's no good. It must be big, it must be fast, it must have results. And you have to have Olympics targets. When you do this game of the impossible, I would say it's going to consume you. It's going to be the thing that really makes sure that you can't even eat, but you got to think about that. You become obsessed with it. You become passionate about it. That is the key to what leadership is all about. Transformational leadership are people who pursue the game of the impossible, and they live and breathe it. Next attribute. Let me talk about what has happened to me when I was in Shell. I was doing a job in London, and I was a vice president for business development based in London, covering 100 countries. And my job at the time, I had a very nice house that Shell gave to me. I'm a big fan of the Chelsea Football Club. And the training ground for Chelsea was next to my son's school. And so one fine day, the boss said, Idris, will you go back to Malaysia? We have a company that loses money every year. For 10 years, we are thinking, if you cannot fix it, tell us we should close it. So I turned up to this company. We had lost 1.4 billion ringgit at the time. And so on the first day, I had a session with my team. I told them, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to make a profit here. There was one Dutchman in the crowd. He said, Mr. Jala, or you call him Mr. Hala here, Mr. Jala, you will never make a profit here because all the guys before you spoke like you. He said, I'm going to do a wager with you. If you make a profit, I will give you $30 US. He's a Dutchman. Small bets. And so 6 months later, he lost. He lost the bet because we made a profit in the first 6 months. And the second year, we made a very record profit. And the third year, we made another record profit. So I asked him, Hans, where is my $30 US? Can you please write me a very nice letter that you lost the bet? Which he did. If you come to the Shell office today in Malaysia, his $30 US is still on the hallway in his letter. It's still there. I'll come back later. How did we turn this around? How do we do it fast and quick? The second attribute of transformational leadership is leaders whose priorities is completely anchored on true north. I repeat, leaders whose priorities are almost ruthlessly anchored on true north. You know, if you haven't defined what really is the thing that you really want for the economy, you get very confused. I would say today in a provocative statement, the most bastardized word in the English language is the word priorities. Because everybody said that's priority to be. The next day they'll say that's also priority. Before long, that's a priority, and everything is a priority. But when you look at the budget, you know the way that the government spend budget is not based on priorities. You know it. It is very important for people to do that. Next slide. Then I was asked after that job to go to Malaysia Airlines. They said to me, the Prime Minister then said, Idris, can you go to Malaysia Airlines? We had the biggest corporate loss in the history. We had 1.7 billion ringgit loss, and we had 3 months or 2.5 months of cash. If we didn't change it, we'd have no money for salaries in 2.5 months, and we have no money for fuels. But then I accepted the job. My wife said I was mad because I've worked in Shell for 23 years. How can you then go into an aviation business and airline, and that has cash only for 2.5 months? When is the time to learn the job? So this is the front page of the newspaper. I look a little young at that time. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the next slide, the first thing we did was I understood what was true north. What was my measure of success? The measure of success was to make every flight profitable. So what we started to do every flight we had in Malaysia Airlines must have a profit and loss statement. So if Antonio is the manager in charge of a particular flight and route, all the flights that are from Kuala Lumpur to London, he and the team cannot fix it. They say we lose money. Every month we lose money. He comes and tells me, Idris, we lost so much money on this flight from Kuala Lumpur to London. We close it. He's out of a job. Simple. That is what we did. So we had 100,000 flights, 110,000 flights in a year. Every one of them had P&L. And we knew exactly who was responsible for turning it around, what they had to do, because that was true north. The profit and loss statement of the flight was true north. Everything else is not important. If you tell me we must improve the quality of the food on the airline, that is fine, but that's not making money. If you don't make money, I'm sorry. It is about making money on the flight. That was what we did. It was relentless. And we had a corporate loss in the first year. This was when I joined. We nearly made a profit in the first year. Second year was record profit, and we have never lost money in the whole time I was there, despite oil price going to $100 a barrel. And so we were profitable. Next slide, please. Transformational leadership, the third one, all transformational leadership must be leaders who get their hands dirty. You cannot be a transformational leader that sits on the ivory tower and then make proclamations about what needs to be done without coming down to do intervention. By the way, our Prime Minister, every Monday morning at 9:30 to 12 o'clock, every Monday morning, we sit down and look at issues pertaining to the economic transformation without fail. That is what is needed, to go and do interventions. If I ask you today, if you have 60 people that have never built a house before, they've never learned how to build a house, if you want them to build a house, how do you go about doing it? They've never learned. Some of you will say, send the guy for 5 years to learn architecture. Send someone 3 years to do engineering, etc., etc. But in this case, I told my team, all of them have never built a house. This is actually my team in Pemandu. We're going to build this house in 3 days. I'm not sending you to Harvard to learn engineering. We are going to build this house in 3 days. So how do you build a house in 3 days when you have never built a house? Most of them are city girls with high heels and they have lipsticks. They've never touched a hammer in their life. There are two things that was needed. First, we needed to take the overall plan. The plan was 3-bedroom house. It got a toilet. It got everything. But that's 30,000 feet. We needed the 3-feet program. Exactly how many planks are needed for that house. Every material, how many nails are needed. Who's going to nail it? Who's going to sew it, etc. And everyone must be taught in the morning of Friday exactly what part to play. On Friday, the team went out to do it. Saturday and Sunday, we built and finished that house. Last year, I had another team, and most of them were men, by the way, 60% of men, very confident, my God, we can build this house. We can do it quicker than the girls who were in the first team. But they didn't follow the instructions. They didn't follow the 3-feet program. 4 days, not 3 days. That's when they completed. I want to make this point quite clear. The problem with most governments is that all of our discussions are at 30,000 feet policy discussion strategy. We do not translate that into 3-feet program. If you fly a plane, you cannot arrive at the destination if you don't land. You cannot keep flying the plane over the city. You have to land. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you forget everything that I've said, remember one word, 3-feet program. That's what you need in Bogota. And that's what you need in Colombia. When we started, let me share some of our success stories, and I will not go through all of it. That's our Prime Minister. When he said, look, Idris, either we execute this or we get executed. That was the word he used. Because the public, they want results. They want it now. You cannot tell the public, well, you will vote for us in government. Maybe in 100 years we will give you the results. No, the public has no time for that. They want it now. And they don't want incremental results. They want big results. So that was the where we were. And so what was true north? We began by saying, look, you can say whatever you like. The true north definition for us was only three things. First, we chose gross national income per capita because we wanted to be a high-income economy. To be clear, GNI is GDP plus net factor income abroad, divided by total number of population. That's the World Bank's definition of high income. So we said, fine, GNI per capita. We wanted jobs. We have 29 million people in our country. We wanted to create 3.3 million jobs, high-paying jobs. If you don't create jobs, people who don't like you because you cannot share the wealth with the people. So we needed jobs. Third, we needed loads of investment, in particular private sector investment. Because if there are no investment, you cannot grow the economy. If you cannot grow the economy, government cannot get more revenue. If there are no investment, there are no jobs. So this is our true north. I'm sorry to say we did not say true north was competitiveness. This was our true north. Anything that we were doing to do, if we could see it was going to move the needle to increase our GNI and the private investment and the jobs, that was the priority, not anything else. That was the conversation we had. Next. This is the model that we came out, and we concluded that what we needed as a model for our economy was high-income economy. We need to be inclusive. That means as many people in our society benefit from the corporate wealth. It needs to be a long period of time, sustainability, and you need quality of life. Actually, these are consultant jargon. The layman's word is, let us be rich, all of us, for a long, long time. That is what it means. Let us be rich, all of us, for a long, long time. Actually, when you think about it, we got to make the language simple. It got to hit the people emotionally. So when we first started in the year 2010, when we did the economic transformation program, everybody that came to Malaysia, whether it's the World Bank, whether it's the IMF, whether it's IMD, everybody came and said Malaysia was stuck in the middle income trap. That was the word they used. I heard the word being used here too. And they said, look, for a long time, that is the World Bank's threshold for high income. And that was our position. We stayed, the gap was 33%. It stayed at 33% for a long time. That is what they meant by stuck in the middle income trap. So what we were doing was, all the things that we were doing was to make sure that this dot there catch up with the red dot. And in 4 years, we managed to bring it down, close the gap to 16%. We've become convinced today, if you do the regression analysis, the maths, if you did it like that, we could get there by the year 2020. We were adamant in Malaysia that by the year 2020, we must become a high-income economy. That was the way in which you wanted to do. We must. It's not there is no plan B. There's only plan A. Next slide. And investment. Everyone said before, we were not happy with this. Our Prime Minister said, look, a CAGR growth of about annual growth of 5.5% was not good enough to do it. After the economic transformation program, we were able to double the private sector investment to 13.6%. I'll tell you later what was the trick. How did we do it? But it was possible to make sure that you really double this. Next slide, please. We promised in 10 years that we would create 3.3 million jobs, and we were able to create in 4 years 1.8 million jobs. So again, it is possible to do it relatively quickly, and the results are also there. we achieved steady growth in our economy. Let me say today, we did not want to have growth on steroid. That means a 10% growth, 12% growth. We have been there before in the 80s. Our view was if you grow at 12% on steroids, at some point it will have side effects. A steady growth controlling inflation was the way in which we wanted to do it. I heard the conversation from the president and a few other speakers today. Malaysia was exactly the same position as Colombia. We were dependent on oil and gas. 40% of government revenue in the year 2009 came from oil and gas. So we determined that we wanted to diversify it. We wanted to make sure most of our revenue will come from the other sectors. I'm pleased to say that over the last 4 years, because of the diversification work that has been done in the ETP, we were able to reduce government revenue coming up from oil and gas to 29.7%. In fact, this year, we'll bring it to 26.3% because the others is going to take up the lion's share of that growth. You can see today, every year we had record government revenue, record taxes, although we did not change the tax rates. That's a record every single year. Before the economic transformation program, which is the red line there, is a 6.3% growth, and subsequent to the economic transformation program, almost double, 12.9% CAGR growth for tax revenue, without changing the tax rate. Because why? When you have the economy growing, private sector make money, you can tax them. We want the private sector to make loads of money. Please go and make money because we will tax you. We don't change the tax rate because then they will say you're changing the goalpost. Keep the same, but make them grow, make money. When we make money, the government got revenue, then we do the thing for inclusivity. We have to do inclusive things for rural people. In fact, my tribe, which didn't have electricity until last year, under this program, we have now electricity in my village, with water and treated water given to many. Altogether, we built 4,553 kilometers of rural roads. We touched the lives of 5 million people. I must say, when I went together with our Prime Minister to one small village, he was out there to declare the rural electrification open. And there was an old lady that wanted to touch the nose of the Prime Minister. So somebody asked him, why do you want to touch his nose? Oh, because when he said, let there be light, there was light. I just want to check whether he's not God. I called my wife and said, you know, darling, it is so wonderful what we're doing here. All those rural people, for simple things, giving them water, electricity, they're so grateful. You know, we people in the town areas, I live in the city of Kuala Lumpur, we take so many things for granted. Every day we moan and groan about everything. We take so many things for granted. The folks in rural areas, little things like that, make such a difference to them. I told my wife, even if we fail in doing everything that we do, this alone is good justification for me doing my job. Next slide, please. For the poor people, the low-income people, bottom 40%, we found out that altogether 2.9 million people were living below poverty, absolute poverty line. We introduced a minimum wage to lift all of them out from poverty line. One stroke of a pen, 2.9 people moved out. We decided to, you know, Malaysia is, I think, very similar to Colombia. Lots of subsidies, fuel subsidies, electricity subsidies, toll subsidies, highway, everything is subsidized. And this was a drain on our government resources. So we decided to do targeted subsidies, rationalize, bring fuel to market, etc. But of course, we got to deal with the bottom 40%, the poor people. So what we decided to do was, the savings that were derived as a result of removing the subsidies, we put them cash transfers and gave them to everyone whose income was below 3,000 ringgit per month. 6.8 million people received. And although we know there were 5% abuse, that's a damn sight better than giving subsidies to a billionaire. The old system have no discrimination to whether you're a billionaire, whether you're poor, you still get the same subsidies. And we've rationalized that. We got loads of complaints from people in the city about traffic. And so we did a lot of things on changing our buses, bringing new trains, etc. We ordered in the first year 38 new trains from China because they were cheap. They're quite good, actually, I must say. And so spanking new train. What we did was we put new buses in the center, the central business district, for free. So everybody within the central business district can jump onto the bus. You don't have to pay. Why did we do that? Because we wanted less taxis in the city to decongest the central business district. And we found out the good effect of doing that was because the tourists jump onto we go KL, they will then move from shopping mall to shopping mall. We empty their wallet. It was a good thing to do. We were concerned about when we started was we had a fiscal deficit. This was a 6.4% fiscal deficit when we started. We were determined to cut this every single year. That is why every year we were cutting it. The fiscal deficit has been reduced to 3.2% as of last year. And then going forward, we are convinced that's a good path to do it. We didn't believe in the austerity drive. We could have just achieved this in probably 2 years. You might ask me why taking a long time it is. Why can't you get a balanced budget in 1 or 2 years? Fast. The reason why we didn't want to do it, because we still wanted to grow the economy. We wanted to grow the economy, so therefore we did not want to take the hard-nosed austerity drive as many governments do. And so we took a very measured approach in doing that. This was a chart the BCG put, and they're saying that countries who are in the very high government debt, more than 100% of GDP, this is a BCG chart, your fiscal deficit is worse off than 4%. Then, if you're worse off than 8%, then you belong in the sovereign crisis level. We wanted Malaysia to move into the safe zone, and we were right here in the year 2009, 2010, 11, 12, 13, and 14. We are already there. So we're quite pleased with the fact that we cut our fiscal deficit, we grew the economy, and so we did all the promises that we wanted to achieve. Next slide, please. This is the OECD chart. We're very pleased when we saw OECD said, no, I didn't say it. According to them, Malaysia will get to become a high-income economy by the year 2020. According to them, China will get there in the year 2026, Thailand 31, Indonesia 43, 42, Philippines 51, Vietnam 58, India 59. So most of them saying that if we continue what we're doing, we should get to the high-income status by the year 2020. I'm pleased to say that on the WEF ranking, when we started, we were at 2012, we were number 25. Then we moved to 24, we moved to 20, and this year we are number 18. So I believe steady growth, steady improvement is good because it's more sustainable. Next slide, please. Let me tell you what we did, actually. How did you do it? I know you want to ask me this. This is what we did. I must say, before I take you through it, I want to tell you, this is common sense. Anybody that tell me it is very complicated, full of theory, I always walk away from those people. I always believe in life, it must be simple. If it's too complicated, nobody can understand it, nobody can do it. So our first step was to make sure, in our case, the Prime Minister and the whole cabinet, we put them into a one-day workshop to argue and argue and argue on the priorities and to set the game of the impossible. Only 2 things. You know, when I first said that to our Prime Minister, he said, Idris, we don't need a whole day. We only do 1 hour because we already know the priorities. I don't agree. Why? Because even if I ask you in Colombia, if you tell me that you know the priorities, if I ask you to show me your annual budget, I guarantee you the budget do not reflect the priorities. I can tell you now. That was the story in Malaysia. We had our priorities, list of 6 or 7 priorities. When we look at the budget is, it does not reflect it. So if you believe those are the priorities, the first thing you're going to do is look at the budget, take money from the areas low priority and put them in the ones that's high priority. You know what happened when we started to do that in the cabinet workshop? All hell broke loose. You know how long it took for us to agree what were the priorities? 5 cabinet workshops. We could not settle this in one day. It was 5. Because we were dead serious. If we were going to put this as a priority, it is going to be reflected in the way in which you're going to run our government budget. Next slide, please. After we finish that, we know the priorities. Step 2 is to conduct labs. By the way, when we agreed the priorities, all of us said these are the priorities. The economic areas is, we have 12. We chose 12. Oil and gas, financial services, health, tourism, business services, all etc. There are 12 of them. This is what we did. We ran labs. Laboratories is putting the private sector people in the room and also the government people in the room, throw away the key and ask them to stay there for 8 weeks for them to find the solutions. That is what we did. Big, fast result, remember? I'm a big fan of the Eagles, the band. There's a song called Hotel California. I like the line. And that's the motto of our lab. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. You stay in the Hotel California, in the lab, and you must come with the solutions. It's a dead serious. 8 weeks, that's all that's needed. Let me tell you what happened there. In the labs, we asked the private sector and the government to identify entry point projects. What are the projects that help us to increase the GNI, the jobs, and the investments? In 8 weeks, 247 billion US dollars was promised. 90% of that investment is from the private sector. It's not government, only 10%. And that is what we did. And we were of the view that if we did this for the initial project, 133, we followed this, it will catalyze a further altogether 444 billion US dollars of investment. By the way, the Chinese don't like the number 4. 4 means dead. So I told my team, can you convert that into ringgit? Because the Chinese don't like this 444. And then we converted, it's still 1.4 trillion. Couldn't get rid of it. The exchange rate is changed now, so it's okay. The 4 is gone. This is what it is. These are the 12 NKES. You can see oil palm. We had one, it's called Greater Kuala Lumpur. Why did we introduce a geography amongst the economic sectors? The reason is this. We believe that cities compete more vigorously than nations. If Bogota is not livable, if Bogota is not competitive, then Colombia cannot make it. So our view, if Kuala Lumpur is not among the top 20 livable cities, if Kuala Lumpur is not competitive as cities, investments and talents wouldn't go there. So we had to fix our city. So loads of things were done in the lab. 8 weeks in the lab. Everything is in the lab. Let me tell you an example of what we did in our Greater Kuala Lumpur. Imagine you did a Greater Bogota. The first thing in the lab, we said, how many people live in Kuala Lumpur? 7 million people. What is the problem? Traffic jam. How do you solve this? Build an underground transport. That is what it is. You cannot argue it. It's done. All cities already done it. You can talk and talk and talk, but at the end of the day, you got to do it. That's what we said. You got to do it. You cannot talk about this. You got to do it. So, by the way, this is the construction. If any one of you have been to Kuala Lumpur today, we are digging almost the entire underground. We are doing it right now. And we concluded we needed to build a high-speed rail that connects Singapore to Kuala Lumpur. They said, Idris, you'll never get Singapore and Malaysia to agree because we love and hate one another. But it was impossible. We got our Prime Minister to talk to the Prime Minister. They agreed. We signed the deal. We're going to build it. We will connect Singapore with Kuala Lumpur. That is because we needed to make Kuala Lumpur competitive and a livable city. I will not go through all the details. Oil and gas, why I picked this example is because it's the top 3 sectors, oil and gas. We had a lab like this. Everyone is in the room. Shell, Exxon, Petronas, Caltex, everybody was in the room. We said to them in the room, what can you do together with the government to make more money from oil and gas in Malaysia? There was one guy who said this. He's a small guy. He said, how come Singapore does not have one drop of molecule of oil and gas? Not a single drop. Yet they have the biggest refinery in the region. How come? How come Singapore does not have a drop of oil and gas? They have the biggest oil trading in the region. How come? You could hear a pin drop. Then the question is, what are we going to do about it? It's not raising the question. Petronas said, okay, we can make Malaysia the regional hub for oil and gas, but we need, Mr. Government, 10,000 acres of land now. Where? Over there. It's called Pengerang. But you know, Mr. Government, we can put 170 billion ringgit of investment. The conversion rate is $1 to 4 ringgit. That is the conversion, you do the maths. They said, you, Mr. Government, if you give us 20,000 acres of land in Pengerang, which is a natural deep port in that area, we will invest 170 billion ringgit to build all this. But by the way, in these 20,000 acres, there are 3,000 graveyards. You have to move the graveyards. There are 942 families living there. You, Mr. Government, must build houses for them and move them nicely. We, Petronas, we cannot do that. So we agreed. We shook hands in 8 weeks. We said, we'll give you the 20,000 acres. You put the thing there. We will relocate 3,000 graveyards. We'll build homes for 942 families. We build school for them nicely. And that's what we did. You don't talk, you do it. Again, same story, huh? And this was done in 8 weeks. It's not about thinking about writing 8 months of policy document. There's no time for that. We've got to be real. I need to give you an example. Oil palm. We said in the oil palm business, we really have to do this. This is very important for us. And we said, how do we get more out from it? We needed to plant 434,000 hectares of land between the year 20, which we actually did. And we had to do a lot of downstream activities because we're predominantly CPO. And we needed to get mills to encourage them to install biogas facilities. We needed, by the way, we had completed 66 so far now, and we had a lot of other things on derivatives. And so we have clinical trials on tocotrienols in the US, and apparently it's going pretty well. And so I will not go into the details. Next slide, you show the commitment in 8 weeks. All the plantations, they came and told us, Mr. Government, we will commit to spend 3.1 billion ringgit of investment, but you got to give us the land. Do you agree to give us the land, yes or no? We don't talk, huh? If you say yes, we'll put it there. By the way, this is 6 times the size of Singapore. That's what it is. And we say, okay, sign, done, let's do it. And that's the way we do it. The word is do it. Again, I said do it, don't talk. Do it. The next step, after we run the labs, then we do a town hall session. In the labs, all the great ideas are in the lab. We exhibit it to the whole public. We conduct town hall session and tell the public, come and see what we're planning to do for Greater Kuala Lumpur, for oil and gas, for tourism sector. If our ideas are rubbish, please tell us. If it's good, give us the credit. If you want to modify, tell us. But you know what? Taxi drivers came, opposition parties, NGOs, students, they all came. You know what the head of the opposition said when he came? He looked at all the booths. This is exactly what we've been saying for 50 years. It's good. Very good. You get public feedback. Step 4. After we got everybody to say this is great, we will build all, we do all this, then we decided to publish it. I must say, this document called the Economic Transformation Program Document Roadmap is the most difficult book for us to publish in Malaysia. Because you know what the government said to me, Idris, you don't write books like that. You know, if you say, let's reduce poverty, big words. But because our document says 54,341 families in the hardcore poor, in 1 year they need to graduate. 4,533 kilometers rural road has to be built. From this village to that village, it's all tabulated. You know, the minister said, look, Idris, if you tell people this is what you do, if you don't deliver it, we'll be hung to dry. Why did you think we wanted to publish this? Because when we publish the document, the whole of the government become pregnant. When you are pregnant, there's only one consequence: you have to deliver. You cannot keep the baby there for more than 9 months. You must deliver. And that is what we did. By the way, there are 3 types of Malaysians: the hardworking and the avid readers. So we give a very thick document for them, 601 pages, economic transformation program. We recommend that bestseller. If they're lazy, we have the 55-page executive summary. The very lazy Malaysian no need to read 6-minute video. And it's all there, available. That's step by step what we do. Step 5. Now that you have published it, all ministers at the beginning of the year will be assigned targets and KPIs by the Prime Minister. No if, no buts. Everybody have it. And so this is it. You got to do it. And we have said to them, at the end of the year, the public will know who has delivered and who has not delivered. By the way, when you start doing this, people start to sweat. Because it's hard. Next slide. Step 6. This is most important. This is the implementation. We call this in Pemandu the DMS implementation methodology. Do it relentlessly. That means if you have the 3-feet program, do it relentlessly. Monitor it constantly. Every Friday, we have a dashboard at 5 o'clock. In this dashboard, it says all the things that the minister and the ministry have delivered during the week is green color. That they haven't delivered is red color. The one that they partially delivered is amber. Why on 5 o'clock on Friday? Why on Friday? Because we can spoil their weekend. If you didn't deliver it. I remember the first time the Prime Minister sent a message to one particular minister. Dear so-and-so, last week I saw that this item was red, and this week it is still red. How come? That's all. On Saturday and Sunday, all hell broke loose. The whole ministry is back in the office, figuring out what are they going to do differently on Monday. Notice the change in behavior. That is what you need, change in behavior. The other one is to solve problem recursively. By the way, I didn't know about the meaning of this word recursively because my English was not so good. Charles Sebel wrote a very thick case study on our Pemandu way, and he introduced the word recursive in his, I think, 90-page case study document. He did it, commissioned by World Bank. He observed that the way in which we do it, and in the document he described the Idris Jala rule of thumb. This is my rule of thumb. In the 8 weeks of the lab, I am of the view that only 30% of what we recommended in the lab will be implemented exactly as we have envisioned it in the labs. Another 30% will be a modification of what we thought in the lab. They're not exactly, but to be modified. Because implementation, you find many, many different problems. There is a further 40% that will be entirely new initiatives that you have to put in implementation. This 30-30-40 rule is very important because the problem with most leadership, whether it's government or corporate sector, they spend 90% thinking about and planning, only 10% leadership involvement in implementation. I ask you to reverse it. 10% in thinking it through, that's why we run labs. Only 8 weeks thinking it through. It is not going to be perfect. We know it. 6 years of implementation. Every week, do it. The word is do it relentlessly, monitor it constantly, and solve problem recursively. So don't worry about the fact that the labs is only 8 weeks, because to be honest with you, we all know we are going to change them when we are in implementation mode. Step 7, we get PricewaterhouseCoopers to validate the results. Because nobody believes if government say, I achieved this result, you better have external validations to say, yes, the result is indeed there. They confirm it. Put a stamp on it. Because, you know, government have a trust deficit with public sometimes. Step 8, every 6 months, we have a session where the Prime Minister and the Minister and me, the 3 people in the room, to assess the performance of every minister against a set target. The minister cannot bring with him any officials to tell him, to help him and defend the story. He must know his job. He or she must know what had happened during the 6 months. So at the end of the day, after the session, the Prime Minister will write a letter, dear Mr. So-and-so, I'm very pleased that you've done this. I like this, I commend you. By the way, I'm not happy about these areas. Listed them down because they're all red, you didn't do it. I want you to focus on doing it for the next 6 months, and your score is 93% or 70%. Sign, Prime Minister. Every year we do like that. Then we put this on the web. So all the photograph of the ministers is on the internet. Their scores is there. The list of what have delivered, what they haven't delivered against the roadmap. Clear. So you can see the score here. That guy on your left there, when you say 103%, then it's 3% ahead of target. The guy on your far left, he's got 8% ahead of target. And the guy in the middle is marginally below target. And we put it out there. When I was sharing this with a senior minister in the Singapore government, I shall not mention his name, he said to me, are you sure you do this, Idris? I am dead sure, because it's there. This is the book. Wow. This is really transparent. Yes? You know, there is a fine balance between transparency, nudity, and pornography. I think you move down that path. I am of the view, if you are honest about even the areas that you didn't deliver as a government, the public will give you a lot of credit for being honest. You can increase your credibility if you say, I did this, but I didn't do this. I promised to do this, but I didn't do it. Nobody believes you if you say you did all of it 100%. There's no such thing. Reality is, you did this, you didn't do that. But you better come clean and say, and that's the approach that we took. Next slide. I want to conclude by saying, there are a few lessons that I put here. I'm absolutely convinced that if you took this kind of approach in your country, there is no doubt you can get big, fast results. This same methodology has been applied now in Tanzania. So my team and I were brought by the World Bank together with Swedish government, US government, and British government I got 24 people helping the Tanzanian government. They've been able to deliver, in some cases, even faster than Malaysia. On rural water, what it took us 5 years in Malaysia to do, in Tanzania, they did it in 1 year. Because they learned from what we could not do. And so I am convinced you can do it here too. But I do believe your president had said quite clearly this morning, and I think my own take of what he said is that you need to do a closure on the 50 years of armed conflict. You need to close the chapter. If somebody dies, you have to mourn and bury them. So that closure is important. But once you close it, you have to open a new chapter. I think you're at a point of inflection today as a government. Open that new chapter. And I want to close by saying, Alexander Graham Bell said, when one door closes, another door opens. Unfortunately, we spend so long regretfully looking at the door that is closed before us. We have forgotten to look at the door that is open right before us in Colombia. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.